Here we're looking at the Pocket Train game. Like all of Jonas Jones's XX games, there's a lot of weird shit going on. Maybe not. Some of it is stuff you don't see in anybody else's games that I am aware of. Or at least remember. I may have played things that have some of these aspects, but there's things that shock me in this, like the tokens, the number of tokens in a city being the way that the valuation of the city, essentially. So the more people lay their tokens in there, the more valuable a city is. In this one, it's not that as big a deal as in, I don't know which one of his had this before. I think it was the 22 Mars, where there was kind of larger cities that held like 4 tokens. So they could really boost their value. They're already valuable cities, and then they can pump it up by putting tokens in there. That's particularly odd. His willingness to fuck around with the sequence of play that we're used to. Maybe creating something a little different. In this case, you buy your trains before you run, which means you never have to go back for not having a train, but you end up not being able to make your run before you buy your train. However, the corporations are able to hold stock, and I read somewhere that this is an 1841 thing. I played 1841. I don't remember it very well. I remember it feeling like a big clunky mess. And actually picked up 1883, which I don't know if I actually got around to, in order to play the same kind of Northern Italy without it being quite as big a mess, and with some of the same kinds of rules, mergers and some of the big economic stuff. This one, I entered into playing this with a great deal of skepticism. I read the rules and I said, oh man, I don't know about this. And then as I started fiddling around and playing the first time, and I fucked up pretty badly on my first play, it's up. I tend to, anything that I video, I kind of put up, no matter how lousy. But at least it's marked as failed. It was very frustrating dealing with all these little changes, all these little differences. Things like the presidents of the companies get a $10 payout at the beginning of the turn. That was one that even in the second playthrough I kept forgetting about. It's not a huge thing, but because it's not a huge thing, maybe it's particularly easy to forget. So you have a little bit more money than you think you're going to. You know, normally what you're used to is figuring out, well, how much money am I going to have because of my runs and whatnot? Well, you got to add another $10 to that, or $10 per company. The game only holds 4 players. I've read places where it says it's actually a pretty good 2-player game, which feels kind of weird to me. It's got a number of different mechanisms. I want to talk a little bit about components. Now, this is, I think, self-published. I don't know if he sells the games. It looks like he does, because he's got these little boxes and everything. But it's like a very, very good print and play. You've got, wooden pieces that are pretty decent. You got little trains. You got little discs that you need. Is there something that was missing? I kind of feel like there was something that would have been useful. It doesn't come with any money. But again, it comes in this size box, you know. It was hard enough getting the rule book in there, right? Um, the stock market, a little too tight. Again, barely fits in the box. So the decision to package it this way, but there's not enough room to have like a stack of pieces, some of which have run, some of which haven't, which is what I usually do. It's a little too tight for that. Didn't end up being a real problem. There were seldom more than 2 pieces on a space, so who cares? The company charters, very tiny. Now, what all this means is that the game has a significantly smaller footprint than your usual 18XX. The track tiles, and these are all laminated, the track tiles, everything is, well, not these, but these are really thick, spongy stuff. You know, the stock is glared. The track tiles are your normal size 18XX track tiles, which is kind of weird. There's weird track in it, shit like this. The oohs turn into weird things. But there's no board to the game. And you don't end up with a big footprint in terms of amount of space that the tiles actually take up. Although the amount of space that you have to put aside for, you know, being able to access the tiles is still quite large. One of the things that I like about these smaller games, and I talked about it in the intro, is that something this size I can indeed drop in a big pocket, like a coat pocket or something, and take it to like a coffee shop or something. I feel like this has a little bit too much of a footprint to really be comfortable to bring to such a situation. You know, I mean, it depends on the coffee shop. I remember going to some that like have tables as big as mine, so that would be no problem whatsoever. But I'm thinking about, you know, the little round table type of thing that's not even as big as a card table, and I was used to going to places that had tables that size. So this wouldn't really qualify as being able to be handled for that. But, you know, whatever you have. Additional things you have is strategy cards. These are instead of privates. They're kind of, they operate as kind of a one-shot thing where you can use the strategy capability and discard the card. They have no value. You don't have to pay for them. They don't have any stock value. There's no certificate limits anyway in the game, but they don't take that up. But they can also be used to allow you to bypass the color that they're printed on, the train of that color or the company of that color's tokens, just allowing you to pass through them. Another rule that I had an issue with is the cost of the tokens. This is one where, you know, there's nothing wrong with the rule. It works fine, but it's hard to remember. When you put a token on the board, it's free, but it costs you $10 per token in its city and $10 per adjacent token. And the part that I kept forgetting is that money goes to the companies that you bought the tokens that are generating that extra cost. The actual share certificates are really small. They rotate for 20% or 10% depending on if you merged a company. You can only merge a pair of companies together. You can't just keep merging things. These are workable. I found them less annoying. These guys were a little too small for my taste. The money, I use my little mini chips to play, poker chips basically. It was hard to keep the money separate from the player money, although I had less difficulty with that than I thought, but I have a fair amount of space on this table. One of the more interesting things is priority, instead of being determined by who passed last or who has the most cash on hand, which are two common ways that I've seen. In this case, you have to bid for it at the beginning of each turn. And that's a neat little capability, an extra little auction that happens each turn. Now, quite often it's not that important to do, but if you really want a particular share that's valuable out there, or if you want to be able to be the guy to buy the company or whatever, you can put up a few extra bucks and get yourself the advantage for that. It's shifted so that whoever goes last has the biggest bonus towards going first next time. So it's always gonna, if nobody bids, it's always gonna keep flipping. So whoever went last goes first. It's not gonna rotate around. You're not gonna get full priority without bidding if you're sitting on that second or third place. The sequence of play is, like I said, kind of weird. So you open up with the priority auction, which I feel works really well as a new concept, at least from my point of view. I haven't seen it before. And then you collect your income for each company you run, which is $10 each, with a little proviso that if you're running it into the red, you don't get that. But that's what those are. And that's what those are. Okay. There's a lot of little symbols up here that I didn't pay any attention to, but now I'm looking at it and I understand what they mean. And they are helpful. There's some information that should be on here that there is actually probably room for at the bottom of the card. But then there's another little clever feature here. Most games have a certificate limit. This game does not. But also a per company certificate limit. This sort of does. It has a soft per company certificate limit. If you have more than, is it 50? I played it at 60%, but yeah, I screwed up. If you have 60% of the shares in your own company, you have to pay a $20 tax. Now, that means you can't hold a majority of the companies because they start out of your own company, because they start off with 20% shares. The company can hold some of it, but it's kind of a painful situation. If you want to make sure you hold your company, yeah, I think I'm happier with what I did, which is that you only pay the tax if you're over 60%. Because I'm used to 60% being the allowable limit on companies. So I completely misplayed that. People were holding, 3 20% shares of their company for relatively large periods of the game. One reason you want to do that is it's a partial cap game, so you end up wanting to throw money into your corporations. And you don't want to sell your shares because this has got an 1830 type stock market, in the sense that each share sold by anyone is going to drop the value of the stock. So yeah, I'm a little iffy on the tax, but since I didn't try it the way it was supposed to be, I tried it the way I thought it was. I can't really speak to what that 40% would cause. It might be actually very interesting to see something where if you want to hold your company, you got to pay a penalty. Now, during what would normally be called the stock round, it works very much as normal. The thing is, though, players aren't going to have a lot of money. You don't have a certificate limit. You don't end up with a lot of certificates, though. So how do you get the money into the companies? Well, the companies are able, first of all, it's partial cap, so when they run, they make their own money off the shares that they haven't sold, but also they're able to buy back their shares from the bank. They're allowed to buy one share during the operating round, but they can also buy other company shares from the bank at that one share per operating round. What about the operating round itself? So one thing I want to talk about is the train phases. They're a little weird. Track goes yellow, green, brown real fast, and then gray, and then, well, there is no black track, which is a little painful. There aren't a hell of a lot of trains on here, but what's kind of neat, and what helps this game not have a long tail, and I talk about this in the wrap, or the second playthrough video, is a lot of XX games have a tail. Well, almost all of them have a tail. And the question is, how big is that tail? And I don't, by which I mean a period where not a lot is happening. People aren't making big decisions or big shifts. Maybe the last turn on this was a tail, and we got to talk about that too. The game just has a fixed number of turns, 7 turns, boom, that's it. One operating round per turn, nothing fancy. That's new to me too. That may be in 1829. I kind of feel like it was. We'll talk more about the stock rounds, or the stock market as well. By having cheap final trains, they're not that cheap. They can still hurt you if you don't prepare to buy them. They can knock you out of the game. Conceivably, they could bankrupt you, but they can certainly make it so you have no chance. But it means that you don't have to run them as long to make them profitable. And they can be very, very profitable because the black train is basically diesel. Now, we have the weird thing about recycled trains. I've seen something kind of like this in other games, but not quite this way, which is that the greens come back as 3 trains. They run just like normal 3 trains. They're at a higher price than they were before. They go up to $300 after all the blacks are sold out, which gives you an opportunity to buy a second train with a company that you weren't set up to buy that big black train with, or whatever ends up happening there. With the stock market, this one really hit me hard the first playthrough. If you don't make half the stock value of your company, it goes back. Now, maybe I just forgot about it the second time, because I think I stopped paying attention to that. But also, it has a double move, but instead of the normal having to make twice the value of the company, you have to make 3 times the value of the company to get that double move forward. So that's kind of funky too. It all works together, and I feel like it is almost impossible to disentangle some of the factors in the game. But then again, I may have been doing it unwittingly, just because there's so many weird things in this game. The first time I played it, I was going nuts trying to remember them. The second time, I may have just said screw it and stopped. It's not what I intended to do, but I may have lost track of some of these special little things and just stopped worrying about them as much and not gotten the correct experience. Let's get back to the operating round then. So the first thing you're allowed to do is sell shares. And those are any shares that your corporation holds. Those could be your initial offering. There's no limit to what goes into the bank pool. So you can just fully capitalize. But each share you sell is going to drop your share value by a row. So you take a big hit to finance your company this way. But you may have to do that especially later in the game, if you float a company with very few shares. Well, you can get it at 100%, but your stock value goes to crap. Then you're allowed to play or upgrade 1 tile. This is all pretty normal. There's no terrain on the map, except there's like one strategy card gives you this little bar which prevents track from operating. It prevents you from operating across one track border, basically. At this point, then you can buy trains. This is so different from everything else. So you're able to buy a train before you run it, which means you don't go back if you're short a train. You must buy a train if you don't have one. You can buy it from other companies right away. And, but whatever train you purchase, if you're forced to, it couldn't have run already in that turn. This is not a rule that's not needed in most XX, but it's in this one because you buy your trains before you run. So you figure out what shares you have to sell in order to buy the train that you need. Then you buy the train. Then you're allowed to place a station. And like I said, stations are free unless there are other stations near them, at which point you have to pay additional money to the companies whose stations are near you. You run your trains. That's pretty much normal. There are some little features. Some of these, some of the starting tiles, you can randomly or strategically place these tiles, but you can't know what companies are available when you do so. And you don't know what your player turn order is. I mean, you might have a guess what you're going to bid, but these yellow tiles and only the yellow oohs have bonuses for 2 of the companies on each of them. And if they run over that particular piece of track, they get a little bit extra money. That's a big help at the very start of the game. Pay dividend or withhold. Again, mostly as normal, but the share price movement is different. If you don't make half your stock value, you go back. If you make triple, you go up twice. We saw people able to make triple once the diesels came into the game. And then you're allowed to buy 1 share. That can be one of your own company. This is from the bank pool. That can be one of your own company, or that can be one of another company. And so the companies are able to invest, which means they can they're able to make money as long as they have cash on them to throw into shares at various times in the game. So you swallow and you can then make essentially interest on the money that you swallowed. So it's not a game so much about making the swallow at the right time when you get your big run. You actually kind of maybe want to make swallows earlier, which is kind of funky. Now there was something I wanted to talk about and now I've forgotten it. In the operating phase, well, I mean, the companies do have a capability to put a lot of money, to collect up a lot of money because they're investing in other shares and whatnot. And that can build you up towards buying a train. And then you sell your shares and get the train. I guess the other big thing is that buying a share, you're able to you're able to float another company from within one of your corporations. You're able to buy the CEO, the presidency of another company, and start it that way, which is just very, very weird. But it gives you a jump because you have very little cash in your pocket usually. And it helps you get a company started because you can only buy the corporation shares. The corporations can only buy shares during their operating round. And then the game has mergers in it where you're from the brown area. Got a battery fault there. Era, let's try to spit it out correctly. From the brown phase in the game, you're able to merge 2 companies together. There's an option that allows you to merge between 2 different players. I played with it, but I don't see it being used much. That was a rule I didn't use. Yeah, we'll talk about that in a moment, I hope. I feel like those mergers are more about trying to save your companies than anything else, because the merged company still only needs to have one train. So it gives you a capability to put two companies together and get a permanent train out of that. Um, but it also combines their tokens, and so they can run over a larger area. And since there are diesels in the game, and the track is like a spaghetti mess that you can create some pretty nasty loops through, you can actually get some pretty big runs by merging companies and getting a big train on them. And everything kind of works in a synergy there where it all actually fits together, and you end up with the track and the train that you want to be able to run a big run. And remember, you need 3 times the stock value to be able to double move, and that becomes quite possible with those big diesels. The diesel also has an additional thing. This is again another one of those little rules that's so easy to forget in something like this if you're used to normal XX, which is one of the endpoints of their run they get to double the value of. I had hallucinations about that rule. I don't know what exactly happened there, but I think I just misinterpreted it and then went off on some kind of spiel about it allowing you to do loops at the end of your run. And no, it doesn't. It's just double the value of the thing. But it is a little strangely worded there. So the merger serves as a couple of things. It does allow you to make bigger runs, but it also, I think, the biggest impetus towards merging is, oh shit, I can't keep my companies, because those 20% shares sure are nice. They make a lot. They make more money. So if you can get your big diesel on a 20% share, you can make more money than by merging a company and getting a diesel. At the end of each round, this is what's missing on here. I had no problem with this particularly. You have to check whether things are sold out. So that instead of happening at the end of the stock round, it happens at the end of the operating round, and shares go up if they're sold out. This is kind of weird because, remember, the corporations are dealing in the shares as well. So, like, they could sell shares and thus make something no longer sold out that you thought would be. So it won't go up. But if they have their own shares, they could sell those and another corporation could buy them, and they end up sold out where they weren't sold out before. There's also a strategy card that lets you buy in the midst of an operating round, or at any point, really. Altogether, this game kind of confuses the hell out of me. It's got significant new concepts in it, and a means of putting together older concepts that were around maybe in slightly different ways. It makes it very hard to get used to what's going on in it. But it does all seem to work. It's a different kind of XX. I said I wouldn't recommend it as a first XX, but it might not be a bad choice as your only XX. Someone did point out, hey, I like the idea of how small it is. Yeah, it might be interesting for that. Just remember, it's no lighter. It's got a lot of depth to it for even for an XX game. There's a lot going on here. I think it packs a pretty big punch for what a little game it is. But if you are used to playing XX, you may actually find yourself having real trouble getting used to how this one plays differently. Um, I said early on, I was absolutely skeptical about it. I was frustrated with that first play, but I'm pretty impressed at this point. All right, let's send it up. Sorry I didn't get to chatter as long and as bloviatory as usual, but I got to get me some sleep.